You're welcome to Let's Talk.
We should sit down and talk. We need to sit down and talk. How Nigeria corruption, how we're going to do our job. The one can stand up and say no to corruption. We're going to do our job because you're telling the system. You are not just doing good for yourself or for the nation alone. You also do good for the future.
Boko Haram is an attack. It's a spiritual attack. It's a satanic attack on Nigeria. We must, if we come to recognize it, we will understand then how to look for the solution.
The Sovereign National Conference, how do we want to achieve that in our present system? We need to sit down and iron out how Nigeria should be governed.
Hello, great to have you on the program. It's Let's Talk. Now, we're going to be talking about the Sudans today. Now, it's been exactly 1 year since the new nation of South Sudan seceded from Sudan as a whole, as a country. On Monday, hundreds of thousands took part in independence celebrations, which, however, have marked a continued conflict with Sudan, domestic and inter-ethnic tensions and all of that. And the question continues, how is it all going to be resolved? It's been 1 year, and 1 year wrought with conflicts here and there. Is there going to be an amicable resolving between the Sudans? Now, some of these things we are going to be looking at today's discussion. Now, to help me do this, I've got with me Chinedu Chidi. He is the winner of the Debater second season. He is also the coordinator of Book Rain Initiative. He is a consultant as well as a social expert and analyst, and he has been on this program severally. You're welcome to Let's Talk.
It's always a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you. Okay, so we are talking about the Sudans. Now, everyone has followed keenly the story of Sudan, South Sudan, how it seceded from Sudan and how it has fared ever since. We've seen a lot of things happen there. Now, when you think about Sudan and all that has happened in the past 1 year, what is your reaction on the whole towards Sudan and what is going on there?
Well, being someone who is quite in touch with the history of Sudan as a country before the secession, I think that it is quite unfortunate that Sudan has had quite a tepid start to national development. Yeah. I think that it is not a very pleasant story that after 1 year of independence, that the only real success that South Sudan can boast of is actually preventing an all-out war with Northern Sudan. Now you have to, and something else I think we have to take into cognizance is the fact that South Sudan is not entirely new to the concept of independence, even though not in a strict sense. Okay. Because since 1972, they got independence, Sudan as a whole, in 1956. And in 1972, Sudan began a civil war, which culminated into an autonomous Southern Sudan government, which lasted for close to a decade, and then was aborted in 1983. Now, the concept of an autonomous government gives the people a collective sense of independence and a realization that they have a great capacity to forge their own future and determine their own destiny, albeit in a limited sense because they're still within a geographical entity where they are still subject to a people who are considered superior in terms of population and, of course, in terms of being in control of government. So, but I think that the concept of measured independence, if you like, is not entirely new to Southern Sudan. That is why we expected that in taking off last year when they got their independence, that Sudan would have made some appreciable progress as far as national development is concerned. But it's quite unfortunate. The United Nations described it as a very tough start to nationhood. And I think that that's a very apt description of the journey, the commencement of the national journey of Southern Sudan.
Okay, having been conversant with the history of the Sudans, I call it. Now, did you expect what we're seeing now? Is it something you expected, or it turned out quite differently from what you expected to have happened within a year of the secession?
Well, I would say that it was expected, but perhaps not at this degree, but it was quite expected, considering the checkered history of development of the peoples of South Sudan and the frosted relationship between Southern Sudan and Northern Sudan historically. I think that I actually expected some difficulty in a seamless, in forging a seamless separation, if you like, between the two countries. And considering the fact also that they have shared resources and economic sources, I knew that it was going to be very difficult to actually have an amicable resolution of the economic dispute that would arise from an attempt to equitably distribute the resources that both countries share. And one of the major challenges to the success or economic success of Southern Sudan today stems from the difficulty in peacefully, amicably, and justly and effectively dividing the resources they share. They both share, they have a common stake in the oil industry, but the Sudans, like you rightly referred to them. Now, as a result of the difficulty in forging a clear path for peaceful resolution or separation of the economy of both countries is why Southern Sudan is facing very difficult economic situation at the moment. Southern Sudan had to shut down its oil production,
Yes,
and 98%, I mean a whopping 98% of Southern Sudan's economic source is actually from oil. So to shut down 98% of your source of income, it wasn't difficult to know that there will be untold economic hardship on the people of Sudan. Now, apart from that, they've also had internal conflicts, which I think they have an incredible responsibility, and they have to understand that their destiny is in their hands, that they are no longer subjugated under a territorial circle dominated by another people. They have an incredible capacity to forge their own destiny, to determine their own future, and that's why inter-ethnic conflicts have to be drastically reduced. They must understand that peace is a ticket to prosperity.
Okay, let's talk about the inter-ethnic conflict. We'll get to some other issues like the oil issue that we've mentioned earlier. Now, you know, some people say that tribalism is one of the things that is the main cause for conflicts. Not just in Sudan, but in Africa, you know, all over the world. You know, what do you think about it? Is it something that is very difficult to resolve, you know, when it comes to tribal issues, when it comes to border, land disputes and all of that? You know, it almost looks as if this is something that can't ever be resolved. What do you think about it?
First and foremost, I believe strongly in the concept of conflict resolution. So I believe that there is no conflict, irrespective of its source of origin, that cannot be resolved. I believe that every conflict can be resolved. It depends on how transparent and how honest the people are to the peace process and how willing they are to relinquish their strongly held sentiments and selfish interest and allow mutual interest to prevail and allow collective interest to prevail. In the case of Southern Sudan, the state particularly of Jonglei state has been deeply embroiled in conflict, which arose as a result of cattle raids and reprisal attacks, and which led to over 900 people being displaced, which I think is quite significant, a significant figure of people being displaced in Southern Sudan. So I think that is very instructive because it is rural-based and it has an economic dimension. We're looking at the cattle raids, and then we're looking at reprisal attacks as a result of that. So I think that we have to look at, first and foremost, the issue of arms proliferation in Southern Sudan, and then we have to look at very strong ethnic-based sentiments held by different ethnic groups within Southern Sudan. Southern Sudan is a nation in process, meaning that they have not been able to develop into a seamless nation, if you like, develop into a single national entity. So I think that it is an evolution that is going on. But what they must understand is that their demons, their greatest demons are no longer in northern Sudan. Their greatest demons are within the borders, within the geographical confines of Southern Sudan. And they must understand that they have an incredible capacity to determine their own future, to chart their own course, to create their own path to prosperity. And you cannot achieve prosperity when you have internal conflict, you have internal strains, you have civil strife and violent, inter-ethnic violence. So I think that what they must realize is that Jonglei State particularly and other regions in Southern Sudan where there is ethnic tension and ethnic distrust and ethnic conflict, they must understand that now they are a nation and they must build a common sense of nationhood, because without a common sense of nationhood, you cannot have collective national development.
Okay, well, the program is Let's Talk, and we are looking at 1 year of South Sudan's nationhood. We are looking at the journey so far, and I'm still talking with Chinedu Chidi, who is a coordinator, Book Rain Initiative, consultant, social expert and analyst. Okay, so let's talk about the oil a little bit. Now, when South Sudan seceded, it took like 75% of the country's oil with it, but the pipelines still running through Sudan, and that in itself is a huge issue. Now, the former civil war enemies cannot agree as to how much the South should pay in transit fees. Now, how do you think with an issue that is very touchy, because, I mean, before now, the oil has been controlled by Sudan, and now all of a sudden it's been like, it's like it's been taken away from them. How can this issue of transit fees, oil, be resolved? And that was one of the reasons why South Sudan shut down its oil production in the first place. What happens?
I think that first and foremost, unfortunately, that this dispute cannot be resolved between Southern Sudan and Northern Sudan in themselves. There has to be an overseeing authority, and thankfully we have an Ethiopian talks going on right now. And I think that the hope of the international community rests squarely or absolutely on the peace process in the Ethiopian talks, if you like. So I think that the hope of the international community, as the United Nations has stated, that there is a deadline for August 2nd of this year for them to reach a peaceful resolution of the economic disputes that they have. And I think if there's any positive that has come out of the shutdown of oil production by Southern Sudan, is because it has brought both parties to the table. And I do hope that with constructive engagement and a consciousness of the incredible impact of the economic hardship that this economic embroil is causing on the people, would force both sides to come to a reasonable conclusion and a reasonable, peaceful resolution of the dispute. Okay. So that's my hope. It rests on the peace process in Ethiopia. It rests on the consciousness and the intervention of the international community, which I think the international community is quite on course at the moment. Okay. I think that's what will resolve this particular conflict. Okay. But the two sides must realize that they have an incredible responsibility and sensitivity to their people, and they must determine to make a difference for once and let the people of both regions enjoy prosperity based on natural resources that they've been blessed with.
Okay, now it does appear that one of the only reason why the conflict hasn't escalated into a full-blown war between the two Sudans is because the United Nations did threaten them with sanctions if they don't resolve their issues. Now, with this deadline of August 2, which is barely how many weeks away, do you think they will be able to meet that deadline? Do you think they will be able to resolve all these outstanding issues within this time and meet that deadline of August 2nd?
Well, I'm not a prophet, and I don't believe in unfounded optimism. But what I would say is that I think they know how important the deadline is. I think they understand how important it is to have a quick resolution of this economic dispute. I think they understand that their people have suffered long enough, especially Southern Sudan. They've suffered long enough. They've been engaged in a civil war that spanned over 2 decades. They've seen over 200,000 people displaced from their homes. They've had one of the worst humanitarian crises in the history of Africa. So I think they must understand how important this particular peace agreement is. They must understand how important it is to speed up economic process in Southern Sudan. They must understand that they owe it to their people to grant them prosperity and succor after all of these years of suffering and deprivation and privation. So I think that they must have an incredible sense of responsibility and a consciousness of the urgency of the now, that they have a great responsibility, and they would determine their destiny as a people. Southern Sudan has suffered so much, and I think that is why I expect that the government of Southern Sudan under President Salva Kiir would understand how important this is, and would put aside ego, put aside territorial pride, and make sure that peace reigns for the good of the people.
Okay, that peace reigns for the good of the people. That's what's important. Now let's take a look at corruption. Corruption is also a huge issue, and you know it's been estimated that about $4 billion in estimated amount has been stolen. You know, no one knows where it is. And I do recall it was in the news when President Salva Kiir made a statement asking officials, wherever they are, to return stolen loots and thereby get amnesty. I'm not sure if there has been any response so far. But talking about the issue of corruption, how can this be resolved? Now, we know that, like we mentioned earlier, when there is chaos, when there's anarchy, where there's lawlessness, we see things like that thrive. How does the South Sudan government begin about recovering? Can they, in fact, recover the stolen loot? And how do they tackle corruption?
I think certainly they can to a certain extent. But unfortunately, I like to say this, that the case of Southern Sudan is not an isolated case. And I think that in different parts of Africa, Africa has been plagued with massive corruption, exploitation, despoliation of resources, diversion of resources, and I think it's quite unfortunate. Now, I would have said, what model in Africa would Southern Sudan look up to and try to create an anti-corruption process and create a stable economy and create a transparent government that will help to forestall the issue of a prevalence of corruption, if you like. And I look at Nigeria, for instance, and I think that Nigeria, which supposedly is a giant of Africa, is a bad example to Southern Sudan. And we have some similarities. In terms of population, South Sudan is quite large in population, not so large, but given their geographical limits quite large. We have a very large population. Southern Sudan is richly blessed with oil. Nigeria is richly blessed with oil. Unfortunately, we haven't also had a very good internal security record. We haven't had a good anti-corruption record. In fact, Nigeria is about the most corrupt country in Africa. So it is sad, and I think it's not an isolated case, but I think there is hope for Southern Sudan. That Southern Sudan, first and foremost, the first process has actually taken place, which is the elections that they had, which was quite transparent. So to have a government that is legitimate means that the people have deposited their trust in that particular government. And I think that what the government must do is to understand and appreciate the legitimacy it enjoys and create a transparent process, create transparent systems. You cannot effectively and sustainably fight corruption without creating transparent systems, not just the individuals, but transparent systems that help to checkmate the extension of corruption, if you like. So I think that they have an incredible responsibility to create transparent systems and ensure that in the long term, the South Sudan will survive by blocking leakages, blocking waste, preventing corruption. And you cannot cure the human being from having corrupt tendencies, but you can checkmate the human's excesses by creating effective systems that curtail corruption. So I think that that's the way forward for Southern Sudan.
Okay, so like you said, if South Sudan were to follow a model of an African country,
certainly not Nigeria.
Okay, since Nigeria has been disqualified, according to you, what other African country would that model likely be?
Well, I don't think there is any ideal example, so to speak, absolutely ideal example in Africa. But I think there are countries in Africa that have been able to manage a resource exploitation and have been able to try to institute a system of equitable distribution of resources, countries like Ghana, South Africa, etc. So I think that Southern Sudan can actually learn from how they've been able to create effective and sustainable systems, or sustainable, transparent, sustainable systems that have been able to checkmate the extensions of and developments of corruption, and have been able to check the tendencies of man, if you like, to take advantage of his fellow man and exploit the system. So I think there are examples and there are models, but the people must understand that it is in their capacity, that they have the capacity, they have the power to determine their own future, to create a system that works. Haven't suffered so much, haven't been deprived so much of even basic amenities of livelihood and of humanity. I think they must understand how urgent it is for them to create systems that will help them accelerate the process of development and begin to enjoy what it means to be truly human in a system that favors development.
Okay, I have this question I'm going to ask, but before then, it occurred to me that the people of South Sudan have found themselves free, in a sense, independent, but, there's been this animosity between them and South Sudan. Now, for those who had been in Sudan, some of them started returning after the referendum and all of that. Some remain, and I do recall that at some point, the Sudanese government said that anyone staying back, you're not a citizen of Sudan. You would have to get special permits and all of that. Do you see that issue being resolved quickly? Because there's still Sudan, finally.
No question.
There's still Sudan. How does this animosity, this end?
I think it goes back to the eternal principle that states that true peace cannot be enforced. It only arises from the stability of the mind drawn from the depths of conscience. True peace cannot be enforced. So a situation where you have disputes resolved and you say, okay, secede, we can share the territories, both countries or both peoples can part ways to create their own geographical entities. It doesn't necessarily remove the distrust, the animosity, the mutual hate, and the anger and angst that they feel against each other. What it does is to put them away from each other. And there has to be a constant international supervision of the situation to ensure that areas or lines where they intersect or where they cross each other are as peaceful, as very peaceful as possible. So I think what can happen is for South Sudan to understand that there is no prosperity from war or from violence in Northern Sudan too, but that they must try as much as possible to remain within their allocated territories, which has some parts in dispute, you know, borderland disputes and all of that. But I think they have to understand that the overriding interest has to be the protection of their people under peaceful circumstances and the prosperity of their people. So I think that for me, that is the overriding interest that must drive them.
Okay,
the
that also
prosperity
seems,
of the people under a peaceful atmosphere.
Okay, there seems to be the fact that Sudan does not have a dominant culture, you know, as against Sudan, who of course they're mainly home to Arab-speaking Muslims and all of that. Do you think that also comes to play? You know, them not having a unifying, dominant culture that they can call their own at the moment?
Well, we have to look way back to colonialism and its destructive effect on African peoples and African culture, on how strange bedfellows were forced together into a unitary geographical entity. But that is not, the Southern Sudan situation is not unique to Southern Sudan. We have the same case in Nigeria and in several other countries where you have different tribes, different ethnic groups in the same geographical entity. We have what we call a natural nation, but there is also an artificial nation where people have been forced together into a single geographical entity. They've lived together for a certain period of time. They have to understand that they have a similar destiny now, that they have a similar goal, a similar future, and they must create, by consent, an artificial nation that is able to pursue a central interest of collective development. And I think it is incumbent on the people of Southern Sudan to understand that they are bound together by virtue of history and heritage, and they must, by consent, choose to create a single sense of nationhood within a single territory and forge a common economic direction for their people. I think that that's what they have to do.
Okay, 1 year of South Sudan's nationhood, the journey so far. That is what we're looking at. And, you know, very quickly, I want us to look at the humanitarian situation that exists at the moment. We've got people that are very much greatly dependent on food aid. Now, we also know that in some cases, journalists and some food organizations, aid organizations rather, have been denied access into some of these areas. What do you see happening, or what do you suggest or advise happens to make sure that these people who have found themselves independent don't continue to suffer along those lines of aid, much needed aid that they are really not getting?
I think there is a limit to the level of humanitarian aid that can come to any people, especially when the source of the humanitarian crisis hasn't been prevented, hasn't been blocked. Now, the reason why the humanitarian situation in Southern Sudan has exacerbated is because of the state conflict with Northern Sudan. As a result of the shutdown of oil production and the forceful claim of Heglig, which was condemned by Southern Sudan, which was condemned by the international community, and the borderline tensions between Southern Sudan and Northern Sudan, Southern Sudanese that were in borderland areas close to Northern Sudan have started to come into Southern Sudan in their numbers. So you have over 200,000 people flooding into Southern Sudan. That is certainly going to create a humanitarian crisis. So you have a case where there is water scarcity, you have a case where people are prone to disease, you have a case where there is limited food supply. So there is a limit to how much the United Nations can do. There is a limit to how much aid can be given to people experiencing humanitarian crisis. The greatest solution, the only reasonable solution, common sense dictates that Southern Sudan has to understand that by mitigating tension with Northern Sudan and creating an atmosphere of peace, can their people have a sense of belonging, and can they effectively and equitably distribute resources to prevent even the issue of aid in the first place. They have enough resources to ensure that their people are economically empowered. and that Southern Sudan becomes a state enviable for its economic strength and national unity.
Okay, and finally, let's talk about the political leadership. You know, we have Omar al-Bashir being the president of Sudan. We've got Salva Kiir, on the other hand, being the president of South Sudan. Now, what should the leadership... Now, these are the people that all the citizens, they look up to. Whatever they say, you know, whatever direction they chart for the countries. What should the leadership focus for both of the countries in trying to stabilize the country, in trying to resolve these issues, and, you know, in that way promote growth in that region?
I think it is simple. Both men must understand that destiny has placed them in a pivotal place in history to determine the direction of their countries. They must understand that they have an incredible responsibility to determine the direction of their people. Both countries have suffered civil strife, they've suffered civil war, they've seen deprivation, they've seen death, they've seen disasters. I think that they must understand that they are at a critical point in their history where these men must know that they've been placed there by destiny and by fate to determine the direction of their country. They have an incredible capacity to meet the incredible responsibility of ensuring that under a peaceful atmosphere that they advance towards a collective goal of prosperity for all people, equitable distribution of resources, and they come to a point where they can truly say we're a people united, strong, and prosperous. Now, in Salva Kiir's independence speech, he said that we are not a people who fear the night, that though the night tarry, light will come and will become prosperous. I find great strength in those words, and I think the people must be encouraged. But you cannot defeat darkness with darkness. You cannot defeat the hardship and the difficulty and the strain that the people face by continuing to provoke Northern Sudan and by continuing to engage Northern Sudan under an atmosphere of violence and tension. For the light that he talked about to truly exist and be widespread, they must pursue peace and prosperity.
Okay, and just for a yes or no answer, because this is not part of what I'm supposed to ask, but do you think the fact that Omar Hassan al-Bashir is wanted by the ICC, do you think that's going to affect, you know, the way he does it?
Well, I think he has shown that he has treated his being wanted with disdain.
Yes,
He's disregarded the warrants by The Hague. So I think that doesn't play any role. It only shows the weakness of the international community and international institutions to bring culprits to justice.
Okay, we have been looking at the country of South Sudan, 1 year of South Sudan's nationhood, and we've been looking at the journey so far. I have been talking with Chinedu Chidi, who is the winner of the Debaters, the second season. He's also the coordinator of the Book Rain Initiative. He is a consultant, a social expert, as well as an analyst. Thank you very much for coming on
pleasure.
Today's show. So while we know that the conflict in the Sudans might linger on for a little while, if you ask the average South Sudanese, they do not regret being independent. And I guess it's just a matter of time. They will find their rhythm and they will be able to resolve all the issues that they have going on amongst them. Thank you very much for being part of today's edition of Let's Talk. We will do this again same time tomorrow. Thank you very much for joining.
You're welcome to Let's Talk.
This is sit down and talk. We need to sit down and talk. How Nigeria corruption, how we're going to do our job.
The one can stand up and say no to corruption. We're going to do our job because you're telling the system you are not just doing good for yourself or for the nation, you also do good for the future.
Boko Haram is an attack, it's a spiritual attack. It's a satanic attack on Nigeria. We must, if we come to recognize it, we will understand then how to look for the solution.
The Sovereign National Conference, how do we want to achieve that in our present system? We need to sit down and iron out how Nigeria should be governed.